How's it going, everybody? In today's video, I wanted to show you how to debug a slow WordPress site. Now, this is something that I've done quite a bit, so my goal here is to show you the steps that I would normally take in order to find out what exactly is slowing down my site and how to fix it. And while this video is probably more geared towards developers, there's going to be a lot of useful information in here for non-coders as well. We will be going over a few plugins that I tend to reach for that will actually help us out quite a bit. So let's get started. This is the site that we're going to be debugging today. Now, it's just a quick little portfolio site that I whipped up to be our guinea pig. And there's really no obvious reason just by looking at it as to why it might be slow. And I did that on purpose. I wanted us to really rely on our tools rather than visual cues. Because what I mean by visual cues is, sometimes you go to a site and there's heavy animations and lots of ads and all that kind of stuff. And you can be like, well, that's obviously the reason why this is slow. But there's nothing like that on here. It's a very plain site. So again, I did that on purpose so we can rely on our tools. And some of the tools that we're going to be using should be something that you already have at your disposal. If you're using Chrome, hit Command-Option-I on your keyboard, and you will pop up with the Chrome developer tools. Now, this is something that you've probably already used to some extent. I mean, the Elements tab and the Console tab are ones that I use daily. But there's two more tabs that I want to touch on. The first tab is the Network tab. Now, this is going to give us what's called a waterfall, and it's going to be extremely helpful in helping us debug why this site is slow. The other tab that we're going to be taking a look at is over here at the top right. It's called Audits. Now, this tab allows us to run what's called a Lighthouse Audit. And, well, it says it right here. It's going to help us identify and fix common problems that affect your site's performance, accessibility, and user experience. We're going to be focusing on that first part, site's performance. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to run a Lighthouse Audit, and it's going to give us a score and some tips on how to fix our site. We're going to take that score and we're going to compare it as we start fixing things. We're going to see that score start to increase, and I'll show you what I mean. But first, let's set up kind of what we want it to do. The first thing is that we want it to run on mobile. I mean, more traffic nowadays is coming through mobile than desktop, so I figured that's a good place to start. The second thing is we only want to deal with performance. We're not really interested in SEO or accessibility or anything like that right now, just performance. So just make sure that is just checked. The next thing that we're going to want to make sure we have checked is the simulated fast 3G. Now, I'm just kind of doing this for the lowest common denominator approach. Like, we want to make sure that our site receives a good score at the slowest possible speed. And that way, we know it's good for people with phones out in the middle of nowhere and people who are running on really fast desktops with a hardwire connection. So make sure that one's checked. And the last button that we want to make sure that we have checked is the clear storage. We want to make sure that we're not getting any sort of cheated scores. We don't want anything to maybe cached or anything like that. So let's click Run Audits to see what it gives us. All right, so while that's doing its thing, let me briefly explain what we're about to look at. So Lighthouse is going to compile a report for us, and it's going to give us a score from 0 to 100. It's going to give us some metrics as to how slow things are, like how long things are going to take to load, as well as some suggestions as what we can do to increase our score. So as you can see, our score is 24 out of 100. We are definitely failing. This is a terrible score to have, and we are going to spend the next little while figuring out how we can bump that up. The next section here is the metrics. This is how long it's taking the site to load. And again, we clicked that simulated fast 3G button. So this is how long things are going to take on a 3G network. If we scroll down a little bit further, you can kind of see a chart as to how the viewport is going to look for somebody on that 3G network. basically they can't see anything for a long time, then they see everything. Next, we see opportunities. These are the suggestions that Lighthouse is giving us as to what we can do in order to make our site faster. Now, these are some pretty good suggestions, but this is not where I want to start. I mean, I just basically wanted to get a baseline of what our score is, this number 24 up here. And we're going to jump over to the network tab, and we're going to start looking at our waterfall. For those who don't know, a waterfall is essentially just a graph that will tell us how long our assets are taking to load and the order that they were loaded in. Now, the first item in a waterfall is usually the request to the server. And you'll see here that we have this giant bar here. And if you hover over it, you'll come up with this new window, and you'll see that that giant bar represents our time to first byte. That's how long it takes PHP and the server to do all of its magic behind the scenes. So if you're making a lot of queries to, the database or to third parties and things like that, that's what's going to increase this number. So we have that giant number there at the top, and we have a lot of slivers over here down the right-hand side of the screen. And as we address this first one, we'll be able to start taking a look at those other ones. They'll take up more of the screen, and we'll move on from there. The other thing that I want to draw our attention to is down at the very bottom left here of this tab. Now, it's going to have a couple different things we're going to want to take a look at. The first thing that we're going to want to take a look at is the number of requests this page is making. This page is making 25 requests. And that when we talk about requests, we're essentially talking about the number of JavaScript files it's downloading, the number of CSS files it's downloading, the number of images, those kind of things. So we have 25 things that we're downloading. We're going to work to reduce that. And as we reduce that number, our site will load a little bit faster. The next thing is the number of megabytes transferred. That's how many megabytes we're downloading. So that could include the size of our JavaScript and CSS, the size of our images, those kind of things. So 8.7 megabytes is pretty darn huge. So we're going to be working to reduce that number as well. The last number that I want to take a look at is the finish. That's how long more or less our site has taken to load this homepage. So right now it's at 6.74 seconds. That's, without any throttling like we were seeing in the Lighthouse audit. So that's a more natural number. So now that we know what we're up against, let's take some steps to resolve these issues. Now, the first place that I tend to start is with images. Images are likely culprits to a large download size of a page. So if you go into your network tab and click images, then you're going to have a list of all the resources on this page and how big they are. You can click on size to sort them by their size, and we can instantly see that we have two images that are outrageously huge. We have hero.jpg, which is 3.3 megabytes, and we have citizen.jpg, which is 2.9 megabytes. Let's take some steps to resolve these. So let's move over to our dashboard. So if we log into our site, we will be able to navigate to our home page and take a look at these images directly. So if we go to all pages and home, we have a couple of advanced custom fields here that are storing our images for them to be displayed on the home page. If you're not familiar with advanced custom fields, I have a course that I'm working on about it, and I will put a link to it in the description. So first off, we have this hero image, and I'm going to click the pencil icon, and it's going to come up with some information. Well, we can instantly see that it is a large image, not only in its file size, but as far as its pixel width and pixel height. So there's no reason for this image to be 6,000 pixels wide. If we go back to our home page, we're just using this as a background image here. Now it does need to be larger than most images that are going to be on this page, but we don't need 6,000 pixels worth of that image. So we can click on Edit Image. and it'll come up with this interface that we can use to crop it down. Go over here to this scale image section, and I'm going to just set it to 1600 pixels. That's usually what I set to full width images. Once it's finished and the image has been saved, we can click back, and we can now see that this image went from 3 megabytes all the way down to 195 kilobytes. So let's move over to our other image that we were just looking at. The other one that we were looking at is this citizen.jpg. And again, we're looking at close to 3 megabytes here. Let's hit edit image, but we don't need it to be 1600 pixels. If we go back to our home page and inspect this image, the container that it's in is only 585 pixels wide. So let's just scale it down to 600. If we hit scale, and then once it's finished, we click back, it's gone from 3 megabytes to 37 kilobytes. So an insane amount of savings. But even with that drastic amount of difference between our original image and our cropped image, we can still take this one step further. On pretty much every site that I work on, we tend to have WP Smush installed on this site. And what WP Smush does is it basically intercepts every image that you upload to your site through the media library and compresses it. And it gets rid of all of that image metadata. And what I mean by that is that every time that you take a picture with a fancy camera or your phone or whatever, it stores extra data into that image, and it usually will store the location, like your latitude and longitude when you took the picture. It will store the make and model of that camera, and we have no use for that. So what this plugin will do is it'll add a button to our edit page right here that will strip that data out of the image, therefore reducing the file size. And since we are just activating this plugin now, we're going to have to go back and actually manually do this ourselves. But normally it would happen every time that an image would be uploaded, it would automatically do that for us. So if we click Smush here, it's going to go in and rip all that data out, and it should give us a nice little report as to how much it was actually able to strip out. So it looks like it was able to take out about 4%. So, I mean, it's not nothing, but it definitely has a long-term impact on your site. So as you start uploading more and more images, this is going to make a bigger and bigger difference. So let's do that to our hero image as well and see what kind of savings we get here. Looks like we got 7%, so a little bit more. And again, this is going to impact your site over time. Like, this is also going to increase your score with auditing tools like Lighthouse. So going back to our home page, let's take a look at our network tab. If we sort them by size again, we can see that our images are much better than they were before. If we look down at the bottom, then you can see that our megabytes transferred was only 2.6, down from the original 8.7, and our finish time is down to 5.05 seconds. So we're definitely making progress. And so let's move on to the next step. And that next step for me typically is auditing any unused CSS and JavaScript. And to give you an idea of what I mean is that technically, if we open up our source code here, technically I have a plugin called BuddyPress installed, and you can see that right here. Now, BuddyPress is a plugin that allows you to have basically a social networking type site. And we're not using any of those features on the homepage. We don't have any sort of login form or a social feed or anything like that. So the fact that these are being enqueued on this page makes them unnecessary. So what we're going to do is we're going to install another plugin called Asset Cleanup. Now, Asset Cleanup is a plugin that I use quite frequently, and it allows you to take a look at all of the scripts and styles that are loaded per page, and then decide whether or not they need to be there. So once we activate this plugin, we can go over to our page, our home page, and we will get this nice little interface right here. It's going to fetch the loaded scripts and styles for our home page, and then it's going to list them out for us down here. So it's going to split it up into 3 separate categories from all the CSS and JavaScript from plugins, from our theme, and from any third parties. So from our theme, we have our app.js and our app.css. We definitely want to keep those or our site's going to break. However, in our plugins, it has enqueued BuddyPress, and that's what we were just talking about. We don't want that. So it's listed out every single JavaScript and every single CSS file that BuddyPress has put on our homepage. Now you can get these to dequeue themselves individually by just clicking this little switch here, but we don't want BuddyPress to happen at all on our homepage. So you can just click this check all box or button, and it will dequeue them all. So let's hit update, and then let's take a look at our source again. So we have all of these BuddyPress JavaScript files, and if we reload the page, we should see them disappear. And it looks like it did. So why that's important is every single one of those JavaScript files is doing 2 things to our load time. It's adding, first of all, it will add an extra network request to our list down here, and it will also add to the number of megabytes transferred. So by removing those, we are kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We're reducing the amount of requests, and we're reducing the amount of megabytes transferred. And you can see that right here down at the bottom left. We went from like 20 something down to 14. And we've went from 2.5 megabytes transferred, or went from 2.7 megabytes transferred to 2.5. So let's go over to our audits tab to see if our score has increased in Lighthouse. So with any luck, we will have jumped up just a little bit. Now, we have a long ways to go. There's still a lot more work that we can do, but just by compressing some of the images and reducing some of the unused CSS and JavaScript, we're now at 31. So we've had, a noticeable amount of increase there. But we also have all of these suggestions that we can now go through and increase that score further and further. So let's start at the top and work our way down. Looks like the first opportunity that we have with the most amount of savings opportunity is enable text compression. So what that means is that we have assets like JavaScript and CSS that can be minified. If you're not familiar with the term minified, when we create our CSS and JavaScript files, they tend to come out like this. Everything is all spaced out and they're really pretty and it's perfect for a human to read. But this is a lot of wasted space for a computer to read. Like every space between every character and every line break is something that the computer has to actually read and interpret. So what minifying does is it eliminates all the spaces and line breaks, so the file size is drastically reduced and it is much easier to read for the browser. And normally this would be a task that is handled by your workflow, like whether you're using Webpack or Gulp or something like that. But that is like a whole nother lesson, and that's something that I will definitely be covering in another series. But just for now, we're going to go in to get our app.css, and we're just going to copy this whole file into an online minifier. So cssminifier.com, you can paste in all of that CSS. It's going to be quite large, but you just paste it in and hit minify, and it should output with a nice minified file. So you can kind of see what I was just talking about. All of the spaces have been removed. So let's come back to here and paste it in here and hit save. Now let's do the same thing with our JavaScript. We can go into app.js and we can go to javascriptminifier.com and paste that in there. Now, hopefully it's not going to crash because that's quite a large file, but we're going to hit minify and hopefully get a nice little output here. So we're going to copy that and we're going to paste it into our file again, hit save, and let's go back to Lighthouse. And after running the audit, we are now at 73. So this is a dramatic increase from where we were at just before. But we're still not done. We still have a lot of other things that we have to deal with. Then now the next one is reduce server response times. And if you remember in our network tab, this is what we were talking about with this time to first byte. And if you remember as well, this does not just mean that, oh, my server is slow, I need to upgrade hosting. That could be part of it, but there's also the other aspect that this could also mean that you're running some pretty heavy network requests in your PHP. You could be making, really big database queries, or you can be hitting a third party. And sometimes it's hard to find out whether this is your server or if this is PHP that's slowing this one down. So I actually want to show you another plugin that will help you tell the difference. So let's head back to our WordPress dashboard and add a new plugin. And this plugin is called Query Monitor. This is a plugin that I use on pretty much all my sites as well, because it really helps me keep track of the changes that I'm making, and it helps me make sure that they are not impacting my site's performance negatively. So now that we have it installed and activated, let's go back to our home page, and we should have a new little taskbar down here at the bottom. If we click the cog, we can click overview. You can start to see that it's going to give us some, generic page speed information, like how long the page took to load, 5.2 seconds, how much memory it's taking, how many queries we have. But there's one in particular that I tend to look at first. If you scroll down over here on the sidebar, we'll see that they have a tab called HTTP API calls, and we have 5 of them. And it looks like we're making those 5 calls to swappy.co. And if you're unfamiliar with swappy.co, it's a public API that allows you to grab information about Star Wars characters. And if you remember at the beginning of the video, we had this table down here at the bottom that was listing out 5 Star Wars characters. So that's the reason why this time to first byte is taking as long as it is. We're making 5 round trips to get information about Star Wars characters. If you look over here on the right-hand side, the very far right column, it tells you the time, and that's the time that it took to complete the request. So each one is taking about a half a second, totaling 2.5 seconds of time to get these 5 characters. So this is something that we can actually address with something called WordPress transients. So let's jump over to our code. So if you've never used WordPress transients before, essentially it allows us to store data for a set amount of time before retrieving it again. What we want to do first is make sure that our transient doesn't exist before we run this block of code. So we want to store everything in a results variable, and then we want to get transient, and we want Star Wars characters, and we're naming this right now. This can be whatever we want. We're just naming the transient. So then we're going to only run this code if it doesn't exist. And then so if it doesn't exist, we do want to make those API calls, and then we want to set the transient. And we're going to use the same name that we used up here. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. And we want to store what comes back into this results array. And then the last parameter is how long you want to store this for. And so I'm going to just do 12 hours. So you do 12 times hour in seconds. And hour in seconds is a default WordPress constant that's available to you. You don't have to set that up. And so long story short, every time that our page loads, it's going to check to see if this transient exists in the database. If it does, it won't run this code and it'll just return our results. It'll return that record in the database. However, if it's been 12 hours and that record no longer exists, it will run this code and set it for us. So let's go back to our page and see how it's affected our page load. So let's refresh our page and see if we get those same HTTP API calls. And we had to refresh it twice because the first time it set the transient for us, and the second time we actually got to pull in that WordPress transient. So we have no more API calls, which is great. Let's check our time to first byte. If we pull up our network tab and hit refresh, we should get our new time to first byte. Let's go up to the top and we're down to 1 second. Now, typically in a production environment, that's still pretty horrendous. We need to clean that up. Now there's two last things that I want to go over. The first thing is we have Query Monitor still running. Let's deactivate that. We don't want that running anymore if we're going purely off of our results now. If we go over, remove it, and then refresh our page, I mean, it's sped it up just by a few hundred milliseconds. It's not nothing, but it definitely helps. Now, the last thing that I want to go over is caching. There's a plugin that I use called WP Rocket. And WP Rocket is hands down my favorite caching plugin because it doesn't just cache the way that other plugins cache. It also has other optimizations that others don't. So now that I've activated it, we can go to Settings in WP Rocket. And so what I'd like to do next is I want to walk you through what my typical setup looks like. WP Rocket has this sidebar over to the left that has all of the different settings that are available to us. So let's start over here with cache. Now, the nice thing about this plugin is it's very much out of the box, ready to go, but there's a little bit of tweaks we can make here. But specifically on this cache tab, everything's pretty much ready to go. The only thing that I would say is like once you actually do have your SSL certificate installed, that you click this checkbox. And since I'm running locally and I don't have SSL on, I'm just going to leave it as is. So the next tab that I want to take a look at is file optimization. Now this one is going to be really handy because if you remember a little bit ago, we actually had to, take our CSS and JavaScript files and go to a website and minify them. Now, normally this would be done by a build process, but if that's not something that you have the luxury of, this is also a really great way to just speed that process up. You can minify your CSS files. Now, when you click on it, it's going to say, well, this could potentially have some issues. So what I would suggest is as soon as you activate this this setting is going and checking your site to make sure everything still looks right. Another thing is that you can combine your CSS files. WP Rocket will actually look through all of your plugins and your site, and it will try and combine all of your CSS files into one CSS file. So that would reduce the number of HTTP requests that we make. So if you remember down here in our network tab, there's all these requests. Well, if we go to our CSS button here, we have 2. Now, as your site gets bigger, that could potentially change. You could have, 3, 4, 5 even. And what that would do is it would try and combine these 2 files into a single file. So it would cut our requests in half. And likewise for JavaScript. In this one, it probably would make a little bit more sense to do. We're at 4 files. We could try and combine those into one. But same kind of issue here. it has some potential side effects. And I really want to emphasize potential. I've done this a bunch of times on a lot of different sites and I've had no issues. So you're just going to want to make sure that you go and check your site afterwards just to make sure everything looks good. So the third checkbox is Optimize CSS Delivery. And this is generating the critical CSS for your pages. It doesn't actually directly impact your site speed, just the perceived site speed. So we're not going to actually check that box. The next two are minifying JavaScript and combining JavaScript files. Exactly like CSS, check the box, save the settings, go back to your site, poke around, make sure everything looks good. The last one is making sure JavaScript is deferred. What this means is, typically when you're loading JavaScript on your site, you want it to be the last thing to load. This will make sure that wherever your JavaScript is in your source, it will still be the last thing to load. And let's save our changes. So let's go back to our home page and see what our new scores are. So let's open up our network tab and hit refresh. And you can see that our time to first byte is now microscopic. We're at 15.8 milliseconds. Now that's down from a second. So we're hitting a fraction of what we were before. Also, if you look down at this here at the bottom left, we are only at 10 requests. Our page size is 380 kilobytes, and it took 163 milliseconds to finish loading our page. So this site is dramatically faster than it was before. But believe it or not, there's still a couple things that we can do to make this go even faster. So if you notice, when we first load this home page, all we're really seeing is this first image, some text and all this. But if you look over here on our waterfall, we're actually loading snowscape.jpg and citizen.jpg. Well, if somebody lands on our site and instantly clicks Hire Me, they're still having to download images that they're never going to see. So there is a technique called lazy loading your images, and WP Rocket actually makes that really simple. So let's go over to our WP Rocket tab again and click on Media. And under Media, there's the lazy loading section. And we don't have any videos or iframes on our site, but we do have a lot of images. So let's make sure that we enable lazy loading for images. And so what this is going to do is it's not going to load that snowscape.jpg, and it's not going to load our citizen.jpg until they're about to be viewed. So that way people aren't having to pay for resources that they're not actually using. So let's open up our network tab and hit refresh. So now we don't have citizen.jpg and we don't have snowscape.jpg, but as we start to scroll down a little bit, they should pop in. So the first image is snowscape.jpg, since that's the one that's closer to the top. If we scroll down a little bit further, citizen.jpg loads. It waits until it's about to come into the viewport and then it loads in. So that will reduce the initial amount of requests that we're having to make, so therefore increasing our load speed. So now let's take one final look at our Lighthouse audit and see where we land. Let's run another audit with the same settings as before. And we are scoring a perfect 100. So we have debugged our problems through the network tab and the Lighthouse audit. We've taken images and we've resized them to their containers. We've lazy loaded them. We've even compressed them with Smush. We've removed unnecessary scripts and styles thanks to that asset cleanup plugin. And thanks to WP Rocket, we now have caching. It's combining our files. And we have reduced our network requests with WordPress transients. So we've done quite a lot of work, and now our site is instant. We can just click this refresh button, as you can see, and it is just loading instantly. So whether you're just starting out in WordPress development or have been doing it for a while, or you're not in development at all, you just run a WordPress site, I hope you learned something today. These are all the things that I wish that I would have known when I was first starting out. So if you liked the video, make sure you hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel so I know to keep doing what I'm doing. Hey guys, I just wanted to shout out WP Rocket really quick. There towards the end of the video, we installed it and implemented some of its features. Well, we only really scratched the surface as to what WP Rocket can do. And so I'd invite you to click the link in the description, check out the features, and if you end up buying a license, you'll be supporting me as I make new videos. Thanks again.